Okay, let's unpack this. We are embarking on a deep dive today that takes us far beyond the official walls of any institution.
Right.
We're going straight into the true political infrastructure of American maximum security prisons.
Yeah, we're not talking about some staff memo or the official Department of Corrections policy book.
No.
We are charting the real governing structure.
Yeah.
It's like a shadow government that decides who gets resources, who has authority, and, who really has the best chance of making it out alive.
And the sources we have today are they're
They're,
crucial.
they're everything.
They're raw, unfiltered testimonies. We've gathered them from former inmates, from some notorious gang shot callers, and even from former guards.
All from the inside.
Exactly. So our mission here is to apply sort of an anthropological lens to create a political map of the American yard.
Okay.
We have to look at these prison gangs not just as, disconnected criminal groups, but as highly organized social and political structures.
With rules.
With established rules, rigid hierarchies, and a whole system of internal governance that, frankly, often just supersedes any official state control.
And from the survivor's perspective, I can tell you that political map isn't some academic theory.
Not at all.
It is the absolute key to your daily survival. And this whole governance structure, it's built explicitly, fundamentally, on lines of race and geography.
Right.
That's what enforces this brutal, but, sickeningly predictable order. You have to know the unwritten rules minute by minute, because breaking one of those means immediate mandatory violence.
So to really understand this political map, we have to start with the absolute foundation.
The bedrock.
The bedrock. Extreme racial segregation. In so many of the facilities described in our sources, and this seems really consistent across federal max security and high security state prisons.
Yeah, places like Big Sandy or Ironwood in California.
Exactly. The racial lines are not just, a preference for who you hang out with. They are mandatory enforced lines of political separation.
Mandatory is the word. And it's enforced by the inmates themselves, which is what makes it so absolute.
Right.
The moment you walk in, you learn the unwritten rule. Stick to your own.
And you see it everywhere.
Everywhere. Institutionalized separation.
Right.
Races do not mix in cells, period. You have strictly separate tables in the chow hall.
We've even heard about designated phones for different racial groups.
Designated phones, separate TVs. Sometimes it even gets down to who controls the volume or the channel in the day room. It's separation by inmate decree, and the stakes for violating it are, they're existential.
It's incredible how deep it goes. We have this one really visceral example from a Texas prison. A fight breaks out when a black inmate and another inmate, who is implied to be white, they strike a third person together.
Okay, so a mixed race action.
A mixed race action. And the immediate reaction from the other black gang members was that they just lost their mind.
Wow.
The lesson everyone learned instantly was the absolute necessity to stick to your own people. And this wasn't the administration enforcing it.
No, this is from the ground up.
It was a spontaneous and furious response from the population itself. It shows that crossing that line is a political act of aggression.
And that absolute rule, it's always there, but it kind of shifts in how it's applied depending on where you are.
The security level.
Exactly. The security level of the facility. If you're in a short-term county jail, maybe waiting for trial or serving a short sentence.
Because the politics are different.
Totally different. It's all focused on the now. Your survival objective is just immediate. It's physical. It's mental. You're fighting off people like, as one source put it, some skinhead who wants to punk you out.
The lines are more fluid there.
Much more fluid. The population is turning over constantly, so the violence is immediate. It's chaotic. It's personal.
But then you transition that scenario to a long-term federal or state max security facility, the kind of place that houses these established shot callers we've been talking about.
And the whole equation changes.
Completely.
The organizational lines become rock solid. They're enforced by these established, recognized gang structures that have decades of history, decades of established rules of engagement.
So the gangs are the administration on the yard.
That's the perfect way to put it. They define the territory. And any violation of that racial segregation, any attempt at crossing a line, it doesn't just trigger a fight between two guys.
No, it's bigger than that.
It triggers organized, sanctioned violence. It's designed to maintain order and that power equilibrium.
Which is why, from the moment you enter the prison system, your identity is immediately quantified. It's documented.
Yeah, that initial intake process, you have to immediately declare your gang affiliation, or at least your perceived affiliation, based on your neighborhood or your background.
And that gets put on your permanent jacket.
And that jacket follows you everywhere. It dictates your political standing before you even take a single step on the main unit.
We have this one inmate who described walking onto a unit, I think it was the small cells at Ballpark, where everyone's just watching your every move. They use mirrors, what the inmates call the dog channel, to check every movement, every new face,
And they're immediately trying to figure out where you fit on that political map.
based on what's on that jacket or what they perceive your affiliation to be.
And if you're a white inmate and you don't declare an affiliation, or you come in without any known street gang backing,
You're in trouble.
you're immediately seen as unaffiliated, a Peckerwood.
And that label, Peckerwood, is basically the kiss of death.
It is. It doesn't mean you're neutral. It means you are a target.
Yeah.
You are completely exposed and vulnerable, and that forces you into an immediate and usually brutal choice of affiliation.
Usually with the AB or the NLR.
Right, just for the basic guarantee of safety. The segregation is so severe that neutrality isn't a strategy. It's an impossibility.
So if racial segregation is the foundation, then the governing bodies are the structure that's built right on top of it.
The actual government.
Yeah, now we're moving to the central government. And in many federal max security prisons, especially out in the western U.S., there is a clear apex governing body, a sovereign power.
And all the evidence points one way.
Overwhelmingly to La M, the Mexican mafia. They are running these institutions.
And it's not just that they're running the Spanish population.
No.
It is absolute control over the entire facility, regardless of race. They do it through systemic intimidation and some pretty sophisticated political maneuvering.
The testimony we have from former Army soldiers, like the accounts from guys like Chris Arelos, they explicitly say they control everything here in federal prisons like Big Sandy.
And that control goes down to the most mundane, minute details, like the weights to the dip bar out on the yard.
Wait, let's pause on that. The detail of controlling the dip bar, that says so much about the extent of their governance, doesn't it?
It says everything.
Why would they care about the weights?
Well, it's not about the iron. It's about establishing territorial dominance and the rule of law. They dictate who can use them and when. They tax the resource. They ensure that their political hierarchy is maintained even during something as routine as physical training.
So that level of granular control means that every single interaction between inmates is potentially a politically charged maneuver.
Absolutely. It proves La Am's role as a true governing body. If you violate a rule about using the weights, the punishment isn't coming from a guard.
No, it's coming from their shot caller.
And it's swift, and it's mandatory. Structurally, the MP soldiers are, mostly Chicanos and Mexican Americans, essays.
And they're often recruited directly from some super ruthless and infamous street gangs.
Like Florencia in South LA. It establishes this really functional street-to-prison pipeline.
There was one exception noted in the source material, though.
Yeah, which speaks to their strategic thinking.
Yeah.
A single white soldier who came from a hood in California. He shows that political utility can, on some very rare occasions, actually transcend that rigid racial barrier.
And this whole hierarchy, it functions through what's known as the key system. This is critical jargon that we really need to unpack.
Yep.
The key system is the centralized command structure. There is a central figure universally called the man, or the principal shot caller.
And his authority is absolute.
We have a direct quote that just speaks volumes. This man can put an order out on whoever guard anybody. It don't matter who you are, man, it's over.
That is total dominion. And what's critical is that this man's authority is tacitly acknowledged, or sometimes even openly preferred, by the institutional administration.
The guards and the warden.
Exactly. The administration knows that their own peace, their ability to run the prison without riots or large-scale chaos, it relies entirely on letting the key system function.
So they prefer to keep the man happy.
They let them run the yard because it controls the general population through fear and established order far more effectively than any correctional officer ever could.
And we have a chilling example that illustrates this. The EME's absolute power to manipulate institutional placement. This goes beyond yard politics and into administrative politics.
Yeah, this one is pretty incredible.
There was a Nazi lowrider member, an NLR guy named Ronnie. He gets transferred from Ironwood to High Desert almost immediately after running into a man named Boxer.
Okay, and Boxer was a known Mexican mafia figure.
Right, but critically, he was also a towel.
Prison jargon for an informant.
Yeah.
Someone who had told on a lot of people.
So this is a deep dive into power dynamics. A towel is an informant who is, tolerated or even sanctioned by the gang itself for specific intelligence, but they're a massive security risk.
Especially one who had told on a lot of people.
The EME's power was so absolute that they could use their institutional influence, the guards and staff they had leveraged or intimidated, to just remove a potential threat.
They get Ronnie transferred.
They get Ronnie transferred out of the facility just to protect their asset, Boxer. They control not just the inmate population, but the actual placement of that population. That proves their superior leverage over the administration itself.
So moving from there to the second major political body.
The white power structures. These are mainly represented by the Aryan Brotherhood, the AB, and the Nazi lowriders, the NLR.
And it's important to differentiate them.
Very. The AB typically functions as the high-level diplomatic and command body. They're sort of like the Supreme Court.
While the NLR often serves as the operational body for the general white population, they're the ones handling the day-to-day decisions and enforcing internal discipline.
That distinction is key. When you hear about internal governance for white inmates, you're usually talking about the NLR enforcing the rules that were laid down by the AB.
Exactly. A former NLR shot caller named Ronnie talked about the grim reality of this mandate at Lancaster Penitentiary. He described hitting this white crip on the yard because that person was not going to walk the yard under the NLR's terms.
So it illustrates the gang's mandate. The NLR dictates white identity, movement, and allegiance.
The second you're identified as white, you belong to their political sphere. And if you claim any other identity, like this white crip, you have to be disciplined.
And the preparation for this kind of conflict is just intensely brutal and clinical.
It is.
Ronnie prepared for a knife fight in a cell, a tiny, confined environment. He described the tactic of grabbing the opponent's hand to neutralize the knife, fighting even while his opponent's 7 partners at the door were hitting him with a rod.
I mean, stop and think about that. This is not a one-on-one fight.
Yeah.
It's a mandatory knife fight in a cell with backup guys hitting you with a rod, and that's just the expected cost of doing business, of being white on the yard.
It's mandatory violence just to maintain identity. He also mentioned gathering rocks in a laundry bag before hitting the white crip, showing this was all pre-planned, organized, territorial violence.
And sometimes the AB hierarchy just takes the place of the administration entirely. A former AB inmate noted that during a sewage flood at a facility, when the official water system completely failed, the gang bosses were like, this is how it's going to go.
They took charge.
They dictated how the population would ration and use the limited water supply. They stepped in where the administration either failed or just chose not to act, and that cements their authority as the default governing body for the white population.
So when the prison infrastructure fails, the shadow government steps into that void.
Which just further validates their power in the eyes of everyone else.
So our final major governing body is the black power structure, which is exemplified in our sources by the DC blacks in facilities like Hazelin and Big Sandy.
And their structure is a little different.
Yeah, unlike the more formalized, almost written constitutions of the EME or AB, their structure is built on deep internal trust and, critically, on historical knowledge.
Their leadership archetype is fascinating, and it's essential. It's typically run by what they call a sterile figure.
And that's important jargon. Sterile doesn't just mean a long-term inmate.
No, it refers to an older, highly respected inmate who maintains non-sexual contact and is seen as holding the deepest history and integrity of the group.
These leaders, like a figure named Big Black in Hazelin, they possess this profound organizational history and intimate knowledge of the game's codes.
And maybe most importantly, genealogical knowledge.
Why is that genealogical knowledge so crucial?
Diplomatic capital.
Ah.
If Big Black knows that a shot caller on the Spanish side is related to a lower-level member of his own group, he understands the political leverage, the potential for common ground.
So that knowledge ensures stable diplomatic relations.
It prevents unnecessary large-scale conflict and allows for really sophisticated negotiation over shared resources.
And their power, just like all the other governing bodies, is solidified through economic control.
Of course.
The DC blacks were noted for dominating drug distribution in Big Sandy, specifically smuggling and selling black tar heroin and crystal meth.
They were the primary supply connection for the high-value narcotics. And this detail about the drug economy is crucial. A prison gram of heroin.
Which is the size of what, an M&M?
An M&M or a peanut, it costs $600.
$600.
That is a massive inflation rate compared to the streets, and it is entirely protected by the gang's political authority.
So this political map inside the prison is constantly being fed by the outside. Let's examine the mechanism that ensures these power structures continue and replace themselves. The direct pipeline from the streets to the cell blocks.
For a lot of these established street gang members, going to prison is seen less as a punishment,
And more as an opportunity.
an opportunity to gain stripes,
Yeah.
to get rank, respect, and organizational advancement.
That's a huge shift in perspective. Time inside is your chance to prove yourself, and that solidifies your status in the organizational chart for life.
We see this with accounts like the White Crip, described in the sources. He was very active in juvenile hall and county jail, just consistently earning more and more stripes. By not turning down fades, so not turning down fights, and willingly going into any tank the police put him in. He was actively, consciously building his resume for the higher prison hierarchy before he even got to max security.
And certain street affiliations are basically mandatory prerequisites for getting that higher prison status.
Absolutely. The explicit connection between the Florencia Street Gang in South LA and La M is a perfect example. That street gang affiliation translates directly into membership potential in the highest prison governing body.
They act as feeder organizations for the prison power elite.
But the politics of identity, especially for white inmates who aren't coming from one of those recognized feeder organizations, it's incredibly complex once they hit the yard.
If you're white and you're not already affiliated with the dominant prison gang AB or NLR, you're immediately vulnerable.
And that conflict between the NLR and the White Crip demonstrates this internal political pressure. Even your minor street affiliations have to either align with or be violently disciplined by the dominant NLR-AB structure on the yard.
There's zero tolerance for deviation. You cannot be an independent actor.
And if you're one of those unaffiliated white inmates, the Peckerwoods.
You have to choose immediately.
You have to align with the AB or NLR or you're going to face constant random threats. The easiest path for a newcomer is often facing discipline or getting punked out by skinheads in county jail as a precursor to formal affiliation or protection.
A lack of affiliation is seen as a lack of loyalty.
Which makes you the ideal victim.
And this forced affiliation is tied directly into the final element of power that really maps the yard.
The money.
Economic authority. Specifically, the drug rackets.
The drug supply chain itself. It reflects and reinforces the political power structure and those racial boundaries.
Though black inmates controlled the weed.
Right, often smuggled in via balloons or like vending machine chip bags by family members in the visiting room.
Meanwhile, the SAs, the Spanish groups often operating under the EAM, they controlled the meth.
These are distinct, racially tied spheres of economic influence. And crossing those economic boundaries is just as dangerous as crossing the physical segregation lines.
Let's go back to the economics for a second because this is where the governance becomes so clear.
Okay.
We heard testimony from that former EMA soldier in Big Sandy. He admitted he sold more heroin and crystal meth there than he ever did on the streets of Austin.
Which is insane.
It's not just profitable, it's a state-protected monopoly. If a prison gram of heroin costs $600, how is that massive markup even justified? And who gets the profit?
The markup is justified entirely by the enforcement mechanism of the gangs. The price is high because the risk of smuggling it in is high, but the risk of stealing it once it's inside is practically zero.
Because if you try to steal from the DC Blacks or the EMA,
You're facing a lethal order. That monopoly price is an indicator of political control. The bulk of that profit flows up to the apex governing body lying A or the DC Black leadership.
and they use that capital for what?
To fund legal defenses, support external operations, or crucially to bribe or leverage corrupt staff, which just further cements their administrative influence.
And the lower tiers get a cut.
The mules and the unit sellers get a cut, but that $600 is what powers the shadow government.
So now we can delve into the actual laws of the yard, the mechanics of discipline and enforcement.
Yeah, how the whole thing is managed.
The gangs authorize or prohibit specific forms of violence, and they maintain a really clear distinction between violence for internal discipline and violence intended for lethal conflict.
You see a clear hierarchy of violence. Slashings are at one level. They're notoriously known as buck 50s at places like Rikers Island.
So named because they often require 150 stitches.
Exactly. And these attacks are usually not intended to kill, but they are absolutely mandatory to enforce rules, to save face, or to mark a transgression.
A buck 50 is an act of political communication.
It is. It says, we control you, and you violated the code.
And in stark contrast to that, you have stabbings.
Which are generally lethal. These are carried out with a burner or a piece a shank that could be up to 8 inches long, often sharpened to an extreme degree.
In facilities like Two Rivers, where stabbings or slashings happen about once a week, a knife fight only ends when one combatant is laid up.
Meaning incapacitated, usually needing serious medical attention. And these aren't random bursts of emotion.
No, they're organized.
They're organized conflicts, often prearranged, described as basically a schoolyard fight that's organized around times like line movement, where the environment provides a moment of cover or opportunity.
So the pervasive reality for any inmate, regardless of their background, is this impossible position of neutrality.
You just can't stay out of it.
Your constant focus as a survivor has to be on just staying alive, which means being prepared to fight at any moment.
And your choice is forced. It's either mandatory affiliation, which gets you political protection but also exposes you to rigid internal discipline, or it's fighting every single day against opportunistic predators.
We have a perfect illustration of how affiliation is actually necessary for survival.
Okay.
A former Irish cartel member stated that his time inside was actually made easier, precisely because he continued his gang activities inside.
They gave him a ready-made structure.
A structure, automatic protection, and a political sphere that recognized him and defended him. Non-affiliation, especially in max security, is functionally impossible because it just marks you as prey.
And this entire operational ecosystem, it's all built on the systemic and often corrupt interactions between the inmates and the staff.
The correction officers themselves.
The administration is a part of this political map.
And the correction officers are constantly negotiating their own safety. A former Rikers guard noted that despite intense internal grievances among the staff...
Rivalries over female colleagues, things like that.
Right. Despite all that, officers must stand together against the inmates. The internal pressure from the inmates to ostracize any officer who doesn't back up a colleague is immense.
So the guard's primary paralyzing fear wasn't the individual inmate confrontation.
No.
It was a lack of immediate backup from his own peers, because he knew the inmates would instantly exploit any fracture in staff unity.
And in some facilities, this staff participation goes from just tolerance to active sanctioning of violence as a means of population management.
You see this in Texas prisons. Guards often just allowed fights to proceed. They'd tell everyone else to sit down and don't get in it.
Effectively sanctioning organized violence.
To manage tensions and potentially eliminate undesirable elements without any administrative hassle. It's a delegation of lethal enforcement to the gangs. It's a crucial dark element of the whole political structure.
But the most shocking illustration of the total, uncompromising reach of this gang political structure is the consequence of the ultimate betrayal. We have testimony of a Mexican mafia order being put out on a man who had only 10 days left on his sentence.
10 days?
Think about that. He was hours away from release from freedom.
And why? What did he do?
A guard, who was referred to as a toad, another term for an informant, used by staff on their own inmates, told the EAM that this inmate was writing an underage girl through letters they had intercepted.
So the guard informed on an inmate to another gang.
Exactly. And the gang's moral or political code dictated that this transgression was unforgivable regardless of his imminent release.
10 days left, and he was stabbed 32 times and killed.
It proves that there is no consideration for inmates about to be released if they violate gang rules. The rules are absolute. The key system's justice is swift.
And the reach of the EAM extends far past the end of your sentence length. The very administration designed to protect him, the guard who discovered the transgression, instead became the informant that sealed his death sentence.
It just proves the completely intertwined nature of corruption and gang governance.
What stands out to me after mapping all this testimony is just the sheer audacity and efficiency of this shadow government. You go into the system believing the state runs the prison, but you quickly realize the state just pays the bills and maintains the perimeter fence.
The gangs are the ones who truly govern the human population inside the walls.
Yeah.
So to synthesize this whole political map, the American maximum security prison system is not a centralized state entity. It's a constellation of highly racially segregated and politically sophisticated governance structures.
Whether it's LM acting as the sovereign power,
or the ABNLR managing the white population, or the DC blacks controlling their turf and a crucial piece of the black market economy, these groups control everything.
Everything, from chow hall seating and designated phones to the lucrative, highly centralized economy of drugs inside the facility. Their authority is total.
And that map shows that affiliation is mandatory for survival. It's not a choice.
It offers protection and a structured existence,
Mm.
but it locks you into a rigid, unforgiving code where internal discipline, a buck 50,
Mm.
or a lethal order can strike at any moment.
Regardless of how long you've served or how close you are to getting out.
The life of a maximum security inmate is fundamentally a political life.
The anthropological observation here, circling back to how people behave under pressure, is fascinating. We noted in some accounts that when inmates are given something substantial to lose,
Like shorter sentences, or a real possibility of parole.
they tend to act less recklessly, which suggests the environment itself can temper the political climate.
So this leaves us with the ultimate provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider.
Mm.
If this shadow gang system, built on racial segregation and organized violence, actually maintains a level of predictability and order, if it controls lucrative rackets that satisfy the demand for contraband.
And if, as the sources suggest, this brutal, consistent political structure is often tolerated and implicitly relied upon by corrupt or overwhelmed staff for population management.
How essential has this deep, dark political structure become to the overall day-to-day operation and function of maximum security prisons in America? What happens if you tried to take that gang government away?